Innanzitutto ringrazio per questo invito, ringrazio anche l'associazione FAMI che seguiamo da anni. Mi chiamo Gabriella Gervasi, sono qui oggi purtroppo come ex caregiver di mio fratello Mario, deceduto nel 2022 per ATTR, transterina amyloidosi familiare, genetica familiare. Quindi vorrei raccontarvi un po' la mia esperienza come caregiver. Il percorso mio e di mio fratello è iniziato con anni di incertezze e visite mediche. Mio fratello aveva dei sintomi che sembravano un po' scollegati tra di loro, dolori muscolari, stanchezza, difficoltà a camminare, problemi di equilibrio. Abbiamo consultato per un paio di anni numerosi specialisti, fatti esami, ha subito addirittura un'operazione alla colonna vertebrale, ma nessuno riusciva a darci una risposta. Quando per intuizione personale ho pensato a una malattia neuromuscolare, ho trovato un professore del Policlinico Gemelli che si occupa di malattie neuromuscolari. La diagnosi è arrivata immediatamente. Dopo un'analisi genetica abbiamo avuto appunto questo risultato dell'ATTR. Logicamente, dopo che il professore ha spiegato a che cosa mio fratello sarebbe andato incontro, devo dirvi che è stata una sensazione molto, molto forte, perché lì ho capito che sarebbe cambiata la vita di mio fratello, che era uno sportivo, una persona che ha dedicato una vita allo sport. Con il tempo capivo che assistere una persona affetta da ATTR non significava una cosa semplice, soprattutto per tutte le criticità che nel tempo si andavano proponendo. Ho capito che è una malattia che non toglie solo la salute, ma anche l'autonomia e a volte anche la dignità. Mio fratello ha iniziato a perdere la sensibilità alle gambe e alle mani, logicamente perché aveva questa neuropatia periferica. Iniziava a faticare quando camminava, difficoltà a svolgere i compiti più semplici della vita quotidiana. Quindi ho dovuto gestire ogni dettaglio organizzativo, organizzare le giornate, perché quando si lavora, logicamente, devi conciliare il lavoro con l'assistenza, prevenire le sue cadute, controllare i sintomi, monitorare il cuore perché avevamo questi sbalzi di pressione, di ipotensione, di vertigini, e quindi capivo che ogni piccola disattenzione può portare a un peggioramento o un nuovo ricovero, come tanti che ne abbiamo fatti. Adesso vorrei raccontarvi un episodio, uno dei tanti episodi, delle criticità che trova un caregiver anche sull'aspetto burocratico. Eravamo in ospedale per richiedere una fisioterapia. Non facevano altro che controllare i moduli, spostarmi da uno sportello all'altro e richiedere referti perché non capivano di che malattia si stesse parlando, parlare con i medici che a volte in modo assurdo non capivano. Mi dicevano, ma è una malattia neuromuscolare? E quindi no, è l'ATTR. Ed era uno stupore perché non riuscivo a capire perché questa malattia era semisconosciuta. Altre cose burocratiche, sapete che il caregiver lavora a 360 gradi, si deve occupare di burocrazia, si deve occupare di prenotare visite, perché logicamente chi ha questa malattia non lo può fare, sopportare ore interminabili per avere un appuntamento e quindi anche per richiedere la sua pensione di invalidità, in quanto l'aspetto economico iniziava a farsi sentire perché non si lavorava più e quindi le spese aumentavano. I farmaci che mi prescrivevano erano abbastanza costosi, viaggi verso i centri specializzati, attrezzature necessarie per aiutarlo nella deambulazione. E quindi nei corridoi d'ospedali, sinceramente, con cartelle cliniche, documenti, avevo un cuore pieno di rabbia, perché diventa stancante e capivo che dovevo lottare non solo contro la malattia, ma anche contro un sistema che sembrava sordo e cieco. Le difficoltà, come ripeto, di seguire un ammalato di ATTR sono tante e complesse. Percorsi di cura limitati, spesso concentrati in ospedali lontano da casa, farmaci innovativi costosi che per richiederli è stato veramente una cosa faticosissima. Io abito nel Viterbese, quindi vi parlo di sanità del Lazio. Quindi prescrizione all'isola Tiberina che passava al Gemelli, dal Gemelli ripassava a noi, passava l'ASL di Viterbo, ti mandavano nella farmacia per ricevere il farmaco in un altro tipo di ASL, per cui impiegavo giornate interminabili per tutti questi percorsi, perché via mail non potevano andare. Non parliamo della pensione di invalidità. Quando abbiamo passato la visita medico-legale mi hanno risposto: ma che malattia è? Non sappiamo come classificarla. Quindi hanno richiesto altri accertamenti, altra fatica, fino a che dopo 2 anni, e purtroppo a soli 2 mesi dalla morte di mio fratello, ha ricevuto la pensione di invalidità. Ma devo dire questo, ma dopo tutto questo noi abbiamo trovato una luce nel buio, l'incontro con Fami, l'associazione che riunisce pazienti e famiglie colpiti da ATTR. E quindi entrare in contatto con loro è stato come respirare dopo tanto tempo. Abbiamo ricevuto informazioni chiare sulla malattia, sulle terapie, partecipando a tutti i loro eventi. Abbiamo trovato anche un supporto emotivo. Grazie a Fami avevamo capito che non eravamo solo pazienti e caregiver, dispersi in 1000 battaglie personali, ma in una comunità che può fare la differenza. Oggi sono qui non solo per raccontare la storia di mio fratello, ma per dare voce a tutte le famiglie che ogni giorno affrontano la stessa lotta. Prendersi cura di un familiare è un atto d'amore immenso, ma l'amore non basta. Servono reti di sostegno, servizi rapidi e politiche concrete che non costringano chi già soffre a combattere contro la burocrazia. Vorrei chiudere con un pensiero che accompagna da sempre la mia vita, anche perché io sono un educatore socio-pedagogico di disabili intellettivi. Prendersi cura di qualcuno significa camminare accanto a lui, anche nel buio più fitto, ma nessuno dovrebbe camminare da solo. Grazie a Fami se oggi sono qui e grazie a voi per avermi ascoltato e per ogni volta che sceglierete chi si prende cura degli altri. Grazie mille.
Thank you, Ms. Gervasi. Although I have to listen through translation, but it reverberated with me what you said, especially the bureaucracy of how you have to go into hospitals and explain again and again and again. So thank you for sharing your story. And also to elaborate how important patient advocacy is, because I strongly believe as caregivers, people that have experienced patients as well, that are involved in patient advocacy, you are at a position where you walk the same journey with them. And you need to empower each other, just like Ms. Gervasi said, you know, you need warriors that are walking alongside you, fighting against the dark and holding your hands. So again, thank you, Ms. Gervasi. Can I introduce the next speaker, please? Welcome, Susan. The podium is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. And as you know from Jamie's wonderful welcome, thank you, you know that I'm married to David. And he has hereditary ATTR amyloidosis. We have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. We'd never heard of amyloidosis and had no idea what this disease was. We didn't know it was in the family, but we now know that it was passed through David's mother, who died aged 54, from an unrelated illness. She actually had a brain tumor, and so she had no idea that she carried this gene. David is the youngest of 5 siblings, and 3 have been diagnosed with hereditary amyloidosis. This is a picture of most of the Gregory family, taken a few years ago. In this picture, there are 14 people who could potentially carry this disease. And also, since this was taken, we now have an additional 4 babies who could also have inherited this gene. So that's 18 potential cases in our family. That's not a rare disease to us. We first found out about amyloidosis because of David's older sister, Anne. She was experiencing all sorts of symptoms: numbness in her hands and feet, weight loss, fatigue, and eventually struggling to climb stairs and to walk. She saw lots of different doctors, and nobody seemed to be able to diagnose anything. Eventually, she was seen by a cardiologist who said he could see that there was something wrong with her heart, but he didn't know exactly what. He had heard of amyloidosis, but he didn't know much about it. Fortunately, she was referred to the National Amyloidosis Centre in London, where she received her diagnosis. At the same time as Anne was going through this, David was also experiencing some symptoms involving shortness of breath when walking and fatigue. Because Anne had been diagnosed, David was also referred to the National Amyloidosis Centre for tests. We were told at the clinic that David had hereditary amyloidosis and that there were no treatments at that time. We went home thinking, well, now what? Having been given David's diagnosis, we were devastated and in deep shock. I felt numb, emotional, I felt despair, As there were no treatments for the disease, it felt like it was a terminal diagnosis. And as Anne had progressed further with her illness, we could see exactly the path ahead for us. David is a very strong and private person who does not like to show his emotions, and so did not talk much about the diagnosis. I know he was shocked, and he was extremely upset at the thought that he might have passed this on to our children, and I think he found that was the hardest part. I don't think of myself as a carer. David doesn't need any help with anything at this stage, but I am a supporter for him and our children and our extended family as they navigate this amyloidosis journey. I am his wife, and we face life together through everything that comes our way. I can attend the hospital appointments, I can take notes, ask questions, I can help to make life as good as possible, offer emotional support, make sure we go out and meet up with friends, talk about normal things, and try to live as normal a life as possible. I can also support him in his amyloidosis journey with the two charities that he's involved in, Amyloidosis UK and Amyloidosis Alliance. I am fortunate that I have family and friends for support, but some people don't have that. There are good support agencies available. Here are some of the global charities that can help, but there are others too. Some really helpful information can be found on these websites. David eventually had to stop working, and that was a huge struggle for him and for us all to adjust to. His mental health was not good at that point, as he enjoyed his work and he really didn't want to stop. It was extremely difficult for us all to manage him at home. We were all a bit on edge, watching what we did or what we said for the first few months. I think that's been one of the hardest and lowest points so far. He realised that this was real and that life as he knew it now had to change. I've learned that when his mental health starts deteriorating, he needs to go out for a walk to boost his mood. David's older brother was also diagnosed 4 years ago. He is unfortunately at a more advanced stage than David. As this is in our wider family, I want to share a little about my sister-in-law Anne and her granddaughter Libby. Libby was a caregiver for Anne for 4 years until Anne passed away. She was an incredible carer, and I know that Anne was extremely proud of her, as we all are.
Mentally, I think it was 7 days a week, 24 hours. I could never switch off from kind of what was happening. I planned to finish uni and move to Brighton to start kind of life there. But when we found out she was ill, that I just forgot about that. Like, I don't think I ever remember thinking about why I did it. I just did it. She looked after me for so long, so I don't know whether part of me was like, well, now it's my time to look after you. Physically, I probably went round in the end about 3 to 4 times a week, and then when she was in hospital or the hospice, it was every night after work. I did work full time during the whole thing as well. Sometimes I felt she didn't understand me in the sense, I feel really bad saying this, but there's some times where we would have little fallouts, mainly because my patience is low. Her patience was low because of the amyloid. She never used to be as bad. And then we'd snap, and that would hurt the most. And instead of me saying how I felt, instead I would just wait a couple of hours and then ring and it would be normal. And I think it's important to say how you feel, definitely, for them to understand and to work together with. I think there was a point where it was like, I still want to enjoy time with you. I don't want it to just be, I'm doing everything for you, but we're not getting a chance to talk or to talk about whatever in life. And then when she needed more like actual cleaning, not just organising and sorting, because I like organising, that's when it got a lot. My dad and his wife, I think they knew something wasn't quite right with me anymore. And I guess you'd call her my stepmom, is quite, she likes to get the answer, which is good, obviously. And she said, like, it's okay to say, you can't do it all. But I was still cleaning until we found someone that could do it. And then when we did, it was just that relief for me. Whenever I mentioned I felt guilty or anything to anyone, everyone would always say, you did so much, you couldn't have done any more. But for me, I wanted to be able to do absolutely everything. Like, it wasn't a matter of tiredness or anything. Like, I didn't care about those things. I just wanted to make sure that every part of her while she was ill was as comfortable or as easy as it could be. During the time that I looked after Nan, I never really felt like a carer. It wasn't a caring role as in a care worker. It was, she's my Nan and I'm going to look after her how she looked after me. As much as everyone else can give you advice and tips on what they think if you're doing too much or anything, you've got to go with your heart. Otherwise you will regret not doing those things.
Libby and Anne had such a great relationship. Anne was always involved in Libby's life. She played a big part in raising the wonderful woman that she's become, and I know that Libby is absolutely devastated at the loss of Anne. Seeing a loved one deteriorate and die is the most difficult experience. If you're a carer or supporter, or whatever it is that you like to think of yourself as, try to surround yourself with friends who can support and encourage you. We care because we love, but sometimes we can feel anxious, isolated, and fearful of the future. I need to talk to people to process things. I can't do it on my own. I read that 1 in 10 of us will become carers and will support someone at end of life. Because of the emotional and physical demands on us, our own health can suffer. Self-care is so important. Have an afternoon out with a friend. Do something for you, something to make you feel good. Treat yourself to the shoes, the hair, the bag, the earrings, whatever makes you happy. I know that's sometimes easier said than done, but even just for a coffee with a friend for an hour can help. I'm very fortunate that we have a group of supporters in the UK that I'm so grateful to have met. This is them here in the picture. We keep in touch via WhatsApp group, and we meet up occasionally for a lovely catch-up. And as we're all on the same journey, they understand completely. This year, it's been confirmed that Libby's mum has the gene. She's waiting for her appointment at the National Amyloidosis Centre in London, and so this disease is now in the next generation. Libby must now relive this experience with her mum. But we know now that there are good treatments available that can slow the progression of the disease. We're so fortunate that huge advances have been made and are still being made in treatment options, and things are looking a lot brighter for the next generation. But the fact remains that amyloidosis is still in our family, and more members will be diagnosed with the condition in the future. And so this is personal for me. It's personal for my family. It's a condition that we will continue to face together. This is our family. This is Charlie, Hannah, and Jack, and our grandchildren, Freddie and Florence. Some of them, or all of them, could carry this gene, and I find that extremely hard to think about. When Freddie and Florence were born, I remember looking at them, this perfect little baby, and just praying, oh, I hope you do not have this. And so we must keep on raising awareness for the sake of all our families. I have this picture on the wall at home that really speaks to me. It says, life is not waiting for the storm to pass. This storm, amyloidosis, is not going anywhere. It's in the family forever. But it's about learning to dance in the rain. We need to find a new way of life, one that is still full of fun and joy. It may be a different life than we expected, but it's still fulfilling and it's special and it's full of hope and full of love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I agree that when you said that support from people that you trust are so important during our journey, and also the appreciation of self-care, because sometimes we can get so tunnel focused in caring for the people that we love that we forget about ourselves, and we're only as good to them as we are to ourselves. So thank you for that. And the other thing I want to quickly say is that thank you for sharing the story of Libby, because she actually reminds me of my children. And I think it's important when we think of caregivers that we don't assume that it's just the wife who's older. We must not forget that there are young people as well that are out there. And I think it's important perhaps to also create an avenue where young people can come together, maybe even attend a conference like this and get to know each other, because their story is unique. Nobody understands their journey. Nobody can understand Libby's journey. But if she spoke to my children, they would have a lot in common. So I will let Dr. Galan take over and introduce the clinicians. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two presentations. And now we will go to the role of caregivers and the relationship with doctors by Professor Celine Labeyrie.
So hello everybody, I'm very happy to be here, and I just would like to start by a big thank you for all the caregivers of my patients. We can't do anything without you. Okay, so I start my presentation. So as you say, in medicine, caregivers are not just helpers, they are partners in care. They provide daily support, assist with medical decisions, and are often the first to notice subtle changes in symptoms. Beyond that, caregiving has a profound impact on the well-being of the entire family. As you say, caregivers are not only the wife or the husband. It could be children, siblings, friends, or sometimes professional carers. Their roles are varied, from helping with mobility to handling paperwork to providing emotional comfort. Each role is essential, and each caregiver's contribution is unique. Caregivers help with the practical aspect of life, of course, meals, transport, attending appointments. They also ensure medications are taken correctly and watch for changes in symptoms. But perhaps most importantly, they provide emotional support every day and serve as advocates for the patients. They record the symptoms, help coordinate the many specialists involved in ATTR care, and make sure that the right questions are asked during the consultations. Their role helps ensure continuity and accuracy in care. As you know, in this room, caregivers caring for loved ones is rewarding but also extremely exhausting. Many caregivers suffer from stress, anxiety, and poor sleep. Social isolation and financial strain are frequent. And your testimony and the testimony of my patients highlight the urgent need for support of the caregivers. And we have numerous studies about this. This very interesting study of Acaster and colleagues in US, UK, and Australia found that caregivers of patients with ATTR had significantly lower health-related quality of life when compared to the general population. As you can see in the red and green graph, more than half of carers have had to change their professional practice. And in the table, I'm sorry, it's quite small, maybe you can read, that the median time for care of the loved one is 3 hours per day, and you add 2 hours for the emotional support, so 5 hours a day, 7 days a week. In another study published last year, CERN and colleagues showed that caregivers of rare disease in particular have a very high burden with many unmet, very specific of rare disease, like diagnosis odyssey, lack of knowledge of many of professionals about the disease. There are numerous factors in this study associated with a decline in carers' quality of life, and very interestingly, the sleep quality of the caregivers. Of course, care is strongest when it includes patients, caregivers, and doctors together. With the patient's consent, caregivers should be invited into consultation. Shared decision-making improves treatment outcomes, but at the same time, we must respect the patient's autonomy. Trust is built on open, honest communication. Doctors must listen not only to patients, but also to caregivers. Empathy and continuity of care help families feel supported. Of course, there is challenges. Medical jargon can confuse the families, consultations are often too short, and caregivers sometimes feel excluded or dismissed. Recognizing these barriers is the first step to overcoming them. There are simple strategies that can improve the communication. Families, and I think it's a very good advice, families can prepare a short list of priorities before the visit, keep a symptom diary, and ask for explanation in very plain language. And at the end of the consultation, in turn, the doctor can summarize key points of the strategy of care. So, you know, everyone here, that caregivers also need support. Patient organizations and peer groups are invaluable, as are psychological counseling and sometimes respite services. In ATTR, we have the specific genetic counseling because this disease often affects multiple family members. I encourage you all to draw on your local and European patient association networks and resources, such as the Amyloidosis Alliance, which create on their website a digital library with numerous very interesting documents, as this booklet for carers. And you have seen all these lovely illustrations during my presentation. It can be downloaded from the website in English or in French, and it will provide you comfort and support. It's very simple and very clear presentation of the role of carers and their needs. Of course, we can look to the future. New treatments are changing the disease trajectories, which also changes the caregiving needs. Digital tools can help the family to manage care more efficiently. And most importantly for me, stronger partnerships between clinicians and caregivers will improve outcomes for both the patients and their families. So thank you for your attention, and I will end this presentation with 3 key points. Caregiver burden is real, family perspective matter, and shared decisions improve care. Thank you very much. If you have some question, I don't know if we have time.
Yes, we do have some time for questions, so please, in the meantime, I wanted to stress that I totally agree with you. And it was very interesting to me the way you present, because we, as doctors, we always think about the burden of the caregiver, but we do, at least I never think about the burden, the psychological burden of the path, the journey for the caregiver. Because for the patient we do think, but for the caregiver it's also, it has been stressed before, a very, very problematic moment.
You know, now I ask to the family if they have a sleep disturbance.
Yes.
During the consultation.
Yeah.
And just this small question can very improve the family.
And then the second one is about this disease as a family disease. I think this is totally, it's very true, and we have to consider that, because we, at least me, sometimes we focus in one patient, one caregiver, but it also has been stressed. This is a family disease. Generally, we have some members of the family in our consultation, so we have to think about this.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, some questions, comments? Over there. Can we have a mic?
I was wondering if you had a way of dealing with role reversals in the family. Particularly when my father was ill, my mother was taking care of him. He was not used to my mother, or certainly not the children, giving him direction. And the same thing when the children become the caregivers, the parents have a hard time accepting taking direction from the children. So it's how do you deal with the role reversal and to make it beneficial for the person being cared for? I think it's an emotional transition to be made. It's a hard thing to do.
Yes, it's very difficult, but in my department we have the chance to have a fabulous psychologist, Geraldine Nunez, and she creates in part a booklet for the carers, and always I call her to explain the patients that he need the carers, so you have to change.
We don't have, unfortunately, we don't have a psychologist, so it's not easy, as you say. Yeah. It is mainly done, in my case, by trusting, by building a relationship with both doctor and caregiver. And then, I don't know, this is very different in between cultures, I would say. In Spain, they understand well the patient, the older patient understand well if you tell them you took care of them before, now is their time to take care of you. And this they understand. But as you say, it's not easy. And for the decision, when you talk about decisions, it is particularly difficult and particularly important, because we have to consider both sides, the patient and the caregiver. We have, yes.
Yes, I just want to reinforce the idea of how needed is multidisciplinarity. You were talking about how other healthcare professionals can help, occupational therapists, genetic counselors, psychologists, and we hear a lot that many services don't have this kind of professionals. So we need to stop that, because we need people that is able to talk with the young people with different strategies, different language, different tools. The same in a family approach, you need a different training for this. And so we need to complement our healthcare provision with all this holistic vision, but doing now, not in the future, because it's needed.
But you know, sometimes just a phone call to the GP, sometimes it's very helpful. And a phone call for the kids, it's very important, I think, to take this time.
Yeah, but we do need to include other people, not healthcare, even different strategies. Yes, it is very important. But I think all health providers, I don't know in France, but in Spain it's not very easy. We do have another question or comment over there. We did? Yes, please. No, we don't have a mic.
Hi, I'm a patient. I'm not an ATTR patient, but an AL patient, and I just want to make a comment, is that from my perspective anyway as a patient, I think sometimes it is harder for carers to go through our journey than us, because we're fighting the battle. We're trying to get better. They sit helplessly and just watch us. So I think as patients, if you are a patient in this room, I think we need to take these sessions very seriously, and we need to be wary of our carers, because they're the ones that love us when we're cranky. They're the ones that love us when we're tired. They're the ones who love us when we're frustrated. So cuddle your carers today. And even though mine's on a plane still from Australia, and will get here this evening, I think just cherish them, because we are all so very grateful for them being part of our lives. And I won't cry yet.
So thank you very much again. And we go now to Professor Nicoletta Balbo. Disability is a family matter. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and apologies for not being able to join you in person. Should I share my slides or you do it from there? Okay.
We are waiting.
Do you want me to share my slides?
Now apparently it's working. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me, because I cannot.
Yes, we can hear you and see the slides perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now you are probably wondering why a sociologist now is giving a speech today, and let me just answer first this question. I've always been researching about family dynamics, and what happened to me in my personal life is that 10 years ago my second son was born, Vittorio, with a rare genetic syndrome. And what I started to do is to actually do what I'm good at, which is basically studying the scientific literature to try to answer to questions like how is his life gonna be, but also how what is gonna happen to our life as parents and to the life of his older son, Enrico. And what I soon discovered is that there was almost nothing in social sciences and in sociology, which is my subject. So now here I am. What I decided to do after a few years of adjustment, after some years since Vittorio was born, was to build a team and a research project on how the disability of a family members, and I'm specifically focusing on children, how these affect the life of the other family members. That, of course, in case of minors, especially the project focuses on the effect on the parents, siblings, and grandparents. I would like to first, as a social scientist, put disability in perspective and give you some numbers also to show you that we, individuals with disability, are not alone. Individuals with disability are the largest minority in the world. We are talking about more than 1 billion people, so 15% of the total worldwide population. And focusing on Italy, which is my country, we are talking about 13 million people, which means 1 every 5 individuals. It is interesting, though, because if we look at it from a social science perspective, what we can easily see is that individuals tend to think that people with disability are few, much fewer than they actually are. And therefore, the question is, why so? Well, First of all, disability is not binary. There are many different types, many different degrees of severity. So it's not like there is an individual, yes, with a disability and no with no disability. And also, as you are experiencing disability, is something that can appear at some point during the life course. And the second thing is that as human beings, we tend to not to see what we actually have fear of. So this is also the reason why we prefer not to see individuals with disability. Talking about rare diseases, that I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There are more than 7,000 types of diseases that are defined rare, which means that they affect fewer than one individual every 2,000 people. But if you think about when we say a rare diseases, we are not saying that these individuals are rare, because in the world there are around 300 million people with a rare disease, which, if you think about, is more or less equal to the population of the United States, which again means that we are not few. My research, as I told you, focuses on children, and I just wanted to give you some numbers because I think it's always relevant, again, to put everything in perspective and be aware of, in general, what is going on in the world around us. We tend to associate disability with aging, and this is something that people with amyloidosis experiences. And of course, that is true. Around almost half of the individuals over 60 years old experience some form of disability. But what I can tell you is that in the world there are around 240 million of children and adolescents having some form of disability. And if we focus on Europe, this means that one individual every 25. If we look at individuals under the age of 16 have a disability. And when we talk about rare disease, 70% of rare diseases are present already from childhood. As a sociologist, I would like to focus and start from the definition of disability that I think really helps also to understand how important is the role of the family here. For a long time, for decades, we tended to define disability as a form of illness or abnormality, a sort of a deviance from what is normal. But luckily, recently, especially starting from the 2000, the WHO and the UN had started to use a different approach and define disability as the interaction between the presence of an impairment or a fragility and the social environment in which the individual with such an impairment lives, which translates into limitation in everyday activities. And I think this definition is very comprehensive and very useful because it has two important implications. The first one is that each of us, is part of this social environment, and is the social environment that creates also many barriers. I now heard caregivers talking about how difficult it is to, from a bureaucratic point of view, and the bureaucratic procedures and processes. Well, if we remove barriers, or at least reduce barriers, we can also reduce disabling conditions. And this means that each of us can do something. Concerning that, we tend to think that barriers in the environment are especially physical barriers, but as a sociologist, I would like to point out that there are also other very relevant barriers. In sociology, there is the so-called self-fulfilling prophecy, which means, and I think this is also something that applies also to family members and caregivers, that when we start to think that the person with a certain disease or disability have some limitation, even if this person do not feel still this way. This sort of definition coming from what the other thinks become part of their identity. And this is, of course, especially strong when it comes to intellectual disabilities, which is something that is not exactly what you are discussing in these days. But it happens for every kind of disease. And in your case, I think the main message here is that let's not give up until there are real limitations, which means like situation like if we can go, for example, vacation, let's go. And I think that is important to remember as a message, especially for the other family members and caregivers. And here I would like to watch with you a video that has been developed by an association of the Down syndrome, but I think it really carries a powerful message. Can you see it?
Sorry, we are starting to see it now, but it's not running.
Yeah, it's all black, right?
Yes, all black.
Yeah, I don't know why, because I don't know if because the connection or I don't want to. Okay, let's just, I mean, I guess you can circulate the slides and then there will be maybe the opportunity for all the people there to watch it, because I don't want right now to lose time, sorry. Let me go to the second implication of the definition, and the implication is that as each of us is part of the social environment where the person with the disease lives, well, it also means that we are all part of the interaction with the disease, and it implies that we experience the consequences of it, positive or negative. I always like to call it a multiplier effect, and if we, for example, focus on children, which is what I'm focusing on in my research, we can try to count how many family members are every day experience the disability of either a child or a sibling or a grandchild. In Italy, there are around 400,000 children with a disability, and basically, if I start counting and make some rough estimates, 95% of them have 2 parents alive, 80% of them have an average 1 sibling, and all of them have an average 2 grandparents. So just if we look at children with a disease or disability, we can say that there are around more than 2 million family members who experience the disability of a child every day. So again, not a small group in the population. I studied, and I'm still studying what kind of consequences the disability of a child have on parents. And what I could easily discover is that there is clearly a negative effect on the mental health, but also on the general health of parents. Before it was mentioned sleeping disturbance. This is something that we also find in our data, which is very relevant. We have tried to measure the care burden for parents having a child with disability, and basically what we have seen is that over the life course, on average, these parents have 1 extra hour of extra care per day when we talk about mothers, and less for fathers, which is quite expected, a bit less than half an hour. But of course, if we sum all this extra time per day up, means that a lot of time that could be devoted to leisure time or work is actually devoted to care. And of course, the negative consequences especially on mental health are due to something that was already discussed. So the difficulties in navigating a complex system that is bureaucratic, healthcare system, very complex, and also in case of children, school system. We have also studied what kind of penalty these parents have on the labor market, that in your case, especially, this can be applied to, in this case, children who are the caregiver of their parents. And what we have found is that on average, mothers, especially who are usually the main caregiver, bear a very high penalty on the labor market. They are less likely to remain on the labor market, 15% less likely to remain employed. They usually work less because they take more period of leave. They earn less. And when I say they earn less, means that the weekly wage is lower. So there might be some discrimination here going on, but also some self-demoting strategies. And overall, mothers who have a child with disability compared to same mothers with the same characteristics but having a healthy child earn 15% less on average every year. What we also have seen, though, is that these family members, and especially in this case parents, when we look at children with disability, are actually a huge value for the entire society because they develop more pro-social and altruistic attitudes and behaviors. They are usually more likely to engage in associationism, volunteering, and political activities. And I think this is something that we always have to remember. Caregivers in many situations create support networks that are a resource for the entire society. Here I reported some of the pieces of qualitative interviews that we carried out with parents of children having a disability. And of course, again, this applies to parents of children with disability. But just to mention some of the issues, I think you have experienced many of them. Lack of communication, for example, between different doctors, and therefore the need for the main caregiver of being sort of the coordinator of the different pieces of the puzzle. Lack of empathy of doctors, a lack of collaboration, again, for considering the different individuals who should support the person with the disease. And also consequences in terms of, like, for parents, for the couple, and the relationship between the two parents. And we were also asking, what kind of strategies have you put in place to overcome these challenges? And the answers were very interesting. Some of the mothers, for example, said, I have to change myself and rethink who I am in order to, for example, feel less judged. And I would like to mention that in sociology, again, we talk about courtesy stigma, which is exactly the stigma that goes from the person with a disease or disability to, like, the other family members who also feel stigmatized, marginalized, and isolated. And then what also this family mentions a lot as a sort of strategy is the creation of patient associations, so creating a support network and peer support more in general. I would like to conclude by also mentioning that we are also studying consequences on the life of siblings, and here there were some interesting presentations about it. Thank you for sharing that. And here there is another one coming from an older sibling of a young sibling with a disability. So it is in Italian, but I think you'll have the translation.
Raccontami una figuraccia che hai fatto con i tuoi compagni di classe.
Fammi pensare. Sì. Allora, ero in quinto liceo, festa dei miei 18 anni a casa. C'era quasi tutta la mia classe, incluso Andrea, che era un mio amico stretto e che in realtà mi piaceva da matti. Festa inoltrata, tutti molto allegri, io in particolare avevo bevuto un drink di troppo. Arriva Andrea ridendo e mi fa: "Oh, guarda che abbiamo dato da bere a tuo fratello." E giù a ridere. Io sono impazzita. Mio fratello Luca, lui è autistico e tu, Andrea, che oltretutto lo sai, vieni a casa mia e gli dai da bere? Insomma, è successo che l'ho praticamente insultato, ho fatto una scenata davanti a tutti, gli gridai: "Ma non ti vergogni?" Mi sentivo profondamente tradita, ero furiosa. Insomma, corro da mia madre a piangere, a 18 anni, con tutta la classe presente. Lei mi prende per mano in silenzio, mi porta in camera da letto e mi fa vedere che mio fratello Luca era lì che dormiva. Avevano fatto bere mio fratello più piccolo, che aveva 16 anni, non Luca, e a me non era passato neanche per l'anticamera del cervello, avevo fatto quella scenata. Volevo sprofondare, festa finita, Andrea e tutti gli altri sicuramente pensavano: "Oh, ma vedi te, questa è matta."
E poi cosa hai fatto? Si è risolta?
La mattina dopo ero angosciatissima. Sono andata a scuola, ho cercato Andrea, gli ho chiesto scusa e lui mi ha detto: "Vabbè, tranquilla, scuse accettate."
Ed è finita così? Il vostro rapporto come è continuato?
In un certo senso sì, scuse accettate, fine della storia. Ma comunque il rapporto si è un po' incrinato da parte mia. Mi sono proprio chiesta: che faccio? Lascio che la questione si chiuda così o no?
Cosa ti turbava?
Beh, sentirsi dire scuse accettate in realtà mi bruciava un po'. In un certo senso mi aspettavo che lui mi capisse di più. Io ero stata iperprotettiva e avevo reagito in maniera sproporzionata perché la disabilità di mio fratello Luca aveva condizionato la mia vita fino a quel momento. Io non gliene avevo mai parlato a fondo, però mi aspettavo comunque di essere capita. E lì ho realizzato che per essere capita avrei dovuto spiegare, contestualizzare, ma anche facendolo poteva non andare bene. Spiegare è uno sforzo immane e sentivo che probabilmente non mi avrebbe capita lo stesso. E poi avvertivo che forse anche lui provava imbarazzo o aveva difficoltà ad affrontare il tema della disabilità.
E alla fine di tutto, come ti sei sentita?
Sola.
So I think this story really tells us that also siblings might feel alone and isolated. Indeed, when we talk about minors, psychologists sometimes call them glass children, not because they are fragile, but because they are invisible. They are invisible to the peers, as the story, Alicia's story, tell us, but also invisible to parents who are too busy to take care of the other sibling with disability. So when we look at siblings, what we observe in our studies is that they are usually more resilient, but also they tend to become adult earlier than the other siblings. That again is a signal of the fact that these siblings sort of have to bear a huge burden and don't want to create any troubles to the other family members. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Professor Balbo. Thank you for opening our minds to these consequences of the disability in the families with numbers, the real consequences. Unfortunately, we don't have time, we ran out of time for questions or comments. I imagine we would be able to have some questions with your email maybe, but I'm sorry about that, but we have to go to our next talk with Giulia Sandoli. The talk is called The Psychological Impact on the Disease on Caregivers. Thank you so much.
Mi chiamo Giulia Sandoli e sono psicologa presso il centro Amyloidosi del Policlinico San Matteo di Pavia. È un piacere per me essere qui oggi e avere l'opportunità di condividere con voi alcune riflessioni riguardanti quello che è l'impatto psicologico dell'amiloidosi ereditaria da transtiretina, ponendo particolare attenzione a quello che è il ruolo del caregiver. Come sappiamo, l'amiloidosi è una malattia rara, progressiva e debilitante che non colpisce solo il paziente che ne è affetto, ma l'intero nucleo familiare. Col progredire della malattia, infatti, diminuisce anche l'autonomia del paziente e di conseguenza aumenta la dipendenza sul nucleo familiare. Per cui parlare oggi di caregiver significa un po' dar voce anche a coloro che spesso silenziosamente affiancano e supportano il paziente diventando parte integrante di quello che è il percorso di cura. Ma chi è il caregiver? Il termine caregiver è stato introdotto da Pirli nel 1990 per indicare una persona che si prende cura di qualcuno che ha un'autonomia ridotta. Solitamente è un coniuge o un membro della famiglia. In Italia i dati ISTAT del 2019 ci dicono che su 59 milioni di persone 8 milioni e mezzo sono caregiver e più di 7 milioni si occupano dell'assistenza di un loro familiare. Il caregiver deve provvedere sia alle necessità pratiche sia all'aspetto legato al supporto emotivo. Spesso ricopre questo ruolo senza una formazione specifica e con un elevato coinvolgimento a livello emotivo. La letteratura ci dice come ricoprire il ruolo di caregiver possa influenzare la qualità della salute fisica e psicologica, la qualità della vita e indirettamente anche la qualità delle cure che vengono erogate al paziente. Il caregiver, a causa proprio del caregiver burden e quindi del peso e degli oneri sul caregiver, può anche riscontrare delle problematiche dal punto di vista fisico, come dicevamo, i disturbi del sonno o anche stanchezza e astenia, ma anche disturbi dal punto di vista psicologico, quindi ansia e depressione. Sebbene quindi la malattia non colpisca direttamente il corpo del caregiver, non colpisce direttamente il corpo del caregiver, ma comunque influisce su quella che è la sua quotidianità, no? Ricerche scientifiche ci dicono come hanno cercato di stimare la quantità di ore che i caregiver dedicano all'assistenza del paziente, stimando all'incirca 46 ore settimanali. In realtà la letteratura più recente ci dice come questo quantitativo di ore, quindi il carico assistenziale, stia diminuendo anche in linea con quelle che sono le nuove terapie e diagnosi precoci nella malattia. Il burden però non è solo un burden pratico inteso come numero di ore legate alle necessità pratiche, ma anche un burden a livello psicologico. La letteratura, in particolare i colleghi fiorentini, hanno svolto uno studio che aveva lo scopo di andare a indagare quello che è il benessere psicologico dei caregiver e la qualità della relazione col paziente con amiloidosi cardiaca. È emerso come i caregiver che avevano livelli più elevati di ansia e depressione erano anche associati a un peggior benessere relazionale, quindi riportavano più conflitti, e anche a una percezione peggiore a livello psicofisico da parte del paziente. Un altro studio condotto da Magliano e colleghi su una popolazione di pazienti che si rientravano all'interno del registro italiano dell'amiloidosi ereditaria da transtiretina aveva lo scopo di andare a valutare ma anche a confrontare quello che è il carico dei pazienti e quello che è il carico dei caregiver. Come possiamo vedere, mentre il carico pratico è significativamente maggiore nei pazienti, il carico psicologico non ha una differenza significativa tra pazienti e caregiver. Inoltre i caregiver sembravano anche percepire meno il supporto da parte dei professionisti e il supporto sociale. Un altro studio condotto dai colleghi spagnoli invece individuava i sintomi autonomici come i sintomi che causavano un maggior impatto, maggior caregiver burden, proprio perché sono quei sintomi che vanno a incidere di più sulla qualità della vita dei pazienti e di conseguenza sulla qualità della vita dei caregiver. Infine i colleghi portoghesi hanno svolto uno studio invece di tipo qualitativo intervistando 22 caregiver portoghesi, dai quali hanno poi condotto un'analisi tematica e individuato delle tematiche comuni. Come prima tematica emerge la conoscenza come alleata del caregiving, quindi conoscenza intesa come formazione, come esperienza. Il secondo tema è l'impatto psicosociale del caregiving, che fa riferimento a esaurimento fisico e psicologico, un impatto a livello sociale, un impatto a livello economico. Il terzo tema riguardava le emozioni alla base dell'integrazione della malattia all'interno del vissuto, quindi emozioni come rabbia, frustrazione, preoccupazione. Il quarto tema invece riportava le necessità richieste dai caregiver, tra i quali appare la necessità di ricevere supporto psicologico, che poi è quello che viene anche raccomandato all'interno di un documento di consenso internazionale che promuove utilizzare un approccio olistico nella cura dei pazienti con amiloidosi, quindi un approccio che tenga conto del paziente a 360 gradi, che consideri sia l'aspetto legato al corpo ma anche l'aspetto emotivo, l'aspetto psicologico, l'aspetto spirituale e che non consideri solo il paziente ma l'intero nucleo familiare. All'interno di questo documento viene anche raccomandato l'inserimento del supporto psicologico all'interno del percorso di cura, soprattutto nei momenti più delicati di questo percorso, come può essere il momento del test genetico oppure l'insorgenza dei primi sintomi della malattia. Questa è un po' la nostra realtà all'interno del centro amiloidosi di Pavia, dove ci occupiamo di un ventaglio di mutazioni tipiche delle zone non endemiche come l'Italia. È appunto un'equipe multidisciplinare all'interno del quale troviamo il cardiologo, il neurologo, il genetista, ma anche appunto la mia figura, che è stata inserita all'incirca 2 anni fa con lo scopo di condurre una ricerca volta a fare un po' una fotografia di quello che è il benessere psicologico sia dei pazienti che dei portatori, dei caregiver, ma anche con lo scopo di offrire loro la possibilità di dei colloqui di supporto psicologico. I pazienti in un primo momento, ai pazienti viene spiegato quella che è la ricerca, viene fatta compilare una batteria di questionari, dopodiché viene offerta la possibilità di ricevere colloqui a cadenza mensili che possono essere erogati sia in presenza sia online. Dopodiché tutti i pazienti viene risottoposta la batteria di test a 6 mesi e a 12 mesi, sia coloro che hanno accettato il supporto sia coloro che non l'hanno accettato. La batteria di questionari è formata dalla scala di resilienza che fa riferimento alla capacità di un soggetto di far fronte a un evento stressante in maniera adattiva, la scala del supporto sociale che va a indagare il supporto sociale percepito sia a livello amicale che familiare, la scala del caregiver burden che invece va appunto a misurare quello che è il burden dei caregiver dal punto di vista oggettivo, fisico, psicologico, relazionale ed emotivo, e la scala dell'ansia e della depressione. Oggi mi soffermo un po' su quelli che sono i risultati preliminari dei caregiver. La dottoressa Mussinelli ha presentato un po' i risultati preliminari di tutta la nostra popolazione. Ad oggi abbiamo arruolato 140 partecipanti, il 19% sono caregiver. Come possiamo vedere sono prevalentemente donne con un'età media di 66 anni, sono tutti coniugi, prevalentemente in pensione. Di questi hanno accettato il supporto psicologico nel 33%, mostrando però un'aderenza totale a questo percorso di supporto psicologico. Prevalentemente i colloqui sono stati condotti online. I risultati preliminari ci dicono che i nostri caregiver hanno prevalentemente livelli di resilienza alti, livelli di supporto sociale medio-alti e bassi livelli di burden. Questo potrebbe anche essere dato dal fatto che i pazienti corrispondenti ai caregiver che abbiamo arruolato sono tendenzialmente pazienti che non presentano un quadro clinico particolarmente compromesso. Ma quello su cui volevo focalizzarmi un po' oggi è quello che i numeri non riescono tanto a raccontare, e quindi è quello che è emerso un po' da questi colloqui, che ci permette un po' di toccare con mano quella che è l'esperienza più profonda dei caregiver. È emerso il tema della fatica invisibile, inteso come una fatica fisica data dalla sensazione di sentirsi estremamente stanchi, di vivere delle giornate senza fine, di avere un carico molto elevato di responsabilità, ma al tempo stesso percepire di non avere il momento per fermarsi. Una caregiver riporta questa frase: se mi fermo io, si ferma tutto. Ma anche una fatica emotiva, che invece è data un po' dalla tendenza dei caregiver a reprimere le proprie emozioni e anzi a farsi da contenitore di quelle che sono le emozioni, le ansie, le preoccupazioni del paziente. E anche dell'ambivalenza a livello emotivo, cioè accanto all'amore, alla dedizione, possono anche insorgere emozioni di segno opposto, quindi rabbia, frustrazione, che poi tendenzialmente sfociano nel senso di colpa. Quindi una caregiver riporta: delle volte vorrei scappare da questa situazione. Sono emersi anche poi temi di solitudine, non tanto intesa come solitudine fisica, quanto come la sensazione di sentirsi distaccati dagli altri, di non essere capiti dagli altri, il tema dell'incertezza, intesa come evolverà la malattia e di conseguenza come aumenterà il carico sul caregiver, e la paura data proprio dall'ereditarietà della malattia. Durante questi colloqui emergono dubbi su quando sia il momento giusto per comunicare l'aspetto dell'ereditarietà ai figli, piuttosto che quando sia il momento giusto per fare il test genetico. Ma anche emerge anche la perdita intesa come perdita simbolica, cioè la perdita di quella che era un po' la vita di prima, quindi quelle che erano le attività condivise, quella che era la routine quotidiana, e quindi la perdita di tutta quella che era la vita di prima, per cui un caregiver riporta: no, la cosa che mi manca di più è aver perso la nostra routine. All'interno di questi colloqui però sono emersi anche fattori protettivi, quindi delle risorse personali che poi coincidono con elevati livelli di resilienza dei nostri caregiver, quindi la capacità di riuscire a individuare i propri limiti e a non sentirsi in colpa, la capacità di riuscire a ritagliarsi degli spazi personali per la cura del sé, piuttosto che la capacità di chiedere aiuto e di rafforzare dei legami familiari. Una caregiver dice: ho capito che non posso prendermi cura di lui se non mi prendo prima cura di me stessa. Qual è però un po' il ruolo dello psicologo all'interno di questo percorso così complesso? È sicuramente quello di offrire uno spazio di ascolto non giudicante, che poi viene personalizzato sulla base dell'unicità della persona che si ha davanti. È quello di andare a lavorare sull'aumentare la consapevolezza emotiva, quindi riuscire a riconoscere le proprie emozioni, riuscire a nominarle e riuscire a legittimarsi anche emozioni come rabbia e frustrazione senza sentirsi in colpa. È quello di andare un po' a scoprire il vissuto della persona che abbiamo davanti, quella che è la storia familiare di quel nucleo, ma anche la storia della malattia all'interno di quel nucleo familiare, ma anche quella di andare a promuovere nuove strategie di coping e strategie più adattive e flessibili, a partire proprio da quelle che sono le risorse personali e relazionali di quella determinata persona. Questa esperienza mi ha permesso un po' di toccare con mano quella che è la bidirezionalità della relazione di cura, quindi accanto al sostegno che spero di aver dato, ho anche imparato tanto a livello professionale e a livello umano. Quindi in conclusione, essere caregiver è un'esperienza umana complessa e difficile. Supportare i caregiver significa supportare l'intero percorso di cura, proprio perché il benessere del caregiver è parte integrante della cura stessa. Grazie mille a tutti e in particolare grazie mille a tutta l'equipe del Centro Amyloidosi di Pavia.
Grazie mille, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so we have, I imagine that Dr. Giulia will be able to answer your questions in the coffee break, but we have to go to the coffee break in order, for the sake of time, in order to go through with the meeting. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi everybody. We're just starting session 5. This section is the impact of ATTR amyloidosis on a family and personal dimension. The chairs today is myself, Vince Nicholas. I represent the UK Amyloidosis Society, and I'm also a patient with ATTR amyloidosis. And on my right is Dr. Laura Obici, and she helps run the in Italy, the Pavia Center for Amyloidosis. So, if we move along a bit, and the first person who's speaking today is Lionel Martinez. Lionel is, well, I won't tell him his age because he's written his age down, but I don't think that would be necessary. He is a French national, and he is a carrier of the MET30 mutation for hereditary, but he's only a carrier, hasn't got anything disease at the moment. He's a board of directors from the French Association, and he instills in people and he talks to people about the importance of genetic screening, and he's also trained to provide therapeutic support for patients. Thank you.
Hello everyone. First, thank you so much to the Alliance for inviting me today. Thank you also for the warm welcome and excellent organization. Grazie mille to President Giovanni and the Associazione Italiana. My name is Lionel Martinez. I'm 51 years old, and I live in the southwest of France, near Lourdes. I'm married, and I have a 70-year-old daughter, Anna. I carry the gene for hereditary transthyretin amyloidosis, the VAL30 MET mutation. I don't have symptoms yet. The beginning of my story. My story began in 2020, when my father was finally diagnosed at age 75, after many years of unexplained medical problems. Gut was suspected, and even amyloidosis, but it took several more years before the diagnosis was confirmed. That was very difficult for him. We had never heard of amyloidosis before. It was a shock. But it was also the start of a journey to learn and share. My personal journey. After speaking with my father's doctor, I wanted to understand more. I searched online without my doctor, and I found good information on the French Amyloidosis Association website. I decided to get tested. I didn't hesitate. I wanted to know. And I wanted to protect my health. I knew that treatments had improved a lot. I contacted the genetic center in Bordeaux directly. And I did the test in May 2021. It included 2 blood tests and 1 meeting with a psychologist. This is a normal process in France. In September 2021, I've got the result. I carry the mutation. Thank you, Dad. Unlike Luke, I accepted this family inheritance. I accepted it calmly because I am optimistic and I knew treatment exists. My father, him, felt very sad. He felt guilty. I told him, it's not your fault. No one chooses to pass on a genetic mutation. Because this disease is genetic, I knew I had to inform my family. The disease concerns the whole family. In France, it's a legal duty to inform relatives. A regulatory framework exists. But for me, beyond, it's also a moral duty. I contacted my sisters, my cousins. My uncle and aunt had already passed away. I didn't contact the children of my cousin directly. I respected the parents' role. My family reacted well. I gave them information about the disease, the symptoms, and the treatment. I talked about testing, but I didn't push anyone. Today, all my close family knows about the disease. The family impact. In my family, 26 adults could be tested. So far, 2 have already symptoms, my father, and including one cousin. 8 have done the genetic test, 7 are positive and asymptomatic. Out of 8, 7 are positive. That's a prevalence of 87%. It's very high, it's very important. Some choose not to get tested, others prefer to wait. That's okay. Everyone has her own way of dealing with it. You can see on this side, you can see my family tree. You can see the potential for genetic testing. 16 persons, and more 14 persons under 18 years which can't be tested at the moment. If any researcher is interested in conducting a comprehensive family genetic study, they can contact me. And I'm here, and the person testing are my father is 80 years old, and the younger is 20 years old. Knowing his genetic status, it's a chance. I believe that knowing your genetic status is really a chance. A chance because treatments exist. It's a chance because you can get regular medical follow-up. It is a chance because you can prepare and protect yourself. We don't choose to carry the gene, but we can choose not to ignore it, because one day the disease may appear. In my case, I became the amyloidosis contact in my family. My cousins ask me questions, sometimes even about things I don't know, but I try to help. There are some positive aspects. This disease made us closer. It helped rebuild family ties, family connections. I am grateful for that. In my experience, what could be better? How to encourage people to take the test? I believe we can improve several things. We need simple and clear information about the disease. We should share stories from people without symptoms. It can help others feel less afraid. We need practical help for testing. Who to contact? What document to bring? It's free. A guide would help. It's very important. We need better laws. In France, for example, we can't get tested if your parent is not tested. This is a problem for adults. The meeting with the psychologist happens before the test. I think it should also happen after the result, especially if it's positive. We need to think about testing for young people. When, how, with what support. And we need positive stories. Stories of people living well with treatments. It's very important. To conclude, telling your family is not just a legal duty. It's sharing knowledge that can protect and connect. It can protect, prepare, and bring peace. It can also create new bonds and solidarity. Telling your family, it's a way to care, it's an act of care, and it's an act of love. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lionel. Thank you very much. Do we do questions? Any questions for Lionel? Well, there's one right at the back there.
The mic, please, to the woman.
Woman, just.
Okay, it's not a question, but just underline what he said. My father died with this ATTR, and his cousin 10 years or 20 years ago died too, and he knew that he was affected with ATTR, and he didn't communicate to us this. And when my father had the first symptoms, if he had knew this, I think that now he's here and not died. So I think it's very, very, very important to communicate to the family this, because you can decide to do or not do the test, but you have the possibility to know is very, very important, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Is there any? Yes, please.
Grazie. Scusate, no, soltanto una ulteriore precisazione rispetto a questo tema. Io credo che sia sì fondamentale informare la famiglia e così abbiamo fatto. Personalmente mi permetto pure di dire, ma io informo tutte le persone che conosco. Tutte le persone che conosco sanno che io ho l'amiloidosi e gli descrivo anche i sintomi, cioè diffondere, perché non è soltanto un fatto che riguarda familiare, perché mio padre aveva dei sintomi, è morto nel 2005, ma neanche il primario di neurologia se n'era accorto. Poi andavo su internet, dopo sono andato su internet e sembrava, cioè adesso c'è molta più attenzione, quindi è bene secondo me che informiamo tutte le persone che conosciamo. Tutto qui.
Thank you very much. That's a great comment. But even as physician, not in recent times, but in the past, we also had some families with relationship that were not easy, in which the information about genetics was not passed through the different generations and relatives. So I think it's still an actual problem, although I really appreciate your message to share information also publicly. But I think it's an issue, and sometimes even doctors may be in a difficult position, and we may not prepare to deal this in the best way. So it's something that requires discussion, I agree. I think it's a very important contribution to discuss also the ability to share this information transparently even in families in which it's not an easy situation. We recommend people to even allow us, if people are contacting us, because also for privacy reasons, it's not even easy for a center to provide information. And sometimes we resolve this telling the people to inform relatives to contact us if they want it, without going into much detail. But there is no a clear-cut solution, and the problem you raise is extremely important.
Yes, I think that's very important. And you know, with families, they all have different journeys, and it is getting more important for them to share experiences and tell the next generation, because we've got so many new things coming along, and all the new medications are very more important. So the future is very bright for those people, but we need to make sure we work together with the doctors and the families, and to make sure that people know that they may have a possibility of having this disease.
There is another comment, please.
Daughter of a patient, and my mother comes from a family of 16 siblings, and she was the first one diagnosed, and 6 of her siblings had passed away when she had her diagnosis. So I felt the responsibility requested by the doctor to let my aunts and uncles knew what was going on. And I have to be honest with you, I've done it with responsibility, but some of them wanted to throw a rock at me. But I think it's the right thing to do. You just have to do the right thing, and that's part of the awareness campaign that we're always talking about. And I've tested myself, and I'm not a patient, but it comes out that out of all of the alive siblings of my mother, out of 10, I think 8 are treating right now, and some had no symptoms at the time, but when they started feeling the symptoms, they started having the treatment. So it certainly helped save their lives. So I think it's very important to let people know that it's among the family and that they should take care of it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Yes, please, Rosalind.
I would just like to echo so much of what has been said already. Just very briefly, my father, from whom I inherited the gene, was one of 13. But we always believed it was just him and one other sibling that was affected. We didn't understand that some other people could have had it and perhaps not shown symptoms. It's a very complicated condition, isn't it? But the point that I would like to make is, when I was diagnosed in 2019, I decided to go public and let everyone know. But we were at I think there's a stigma around Donegal, Irish, Catholic families, that this could be a curse from God, and don't tell anybody, and shh, shh, shh. So we were at a blessing of the grave ceremony at my father's graveside, and one of my aunts, my Aunt Geraldine, who didn't show any symptoms, took me aside and she said, "Rosaline, your father would be so ashamed that you have drawn attention to the world about our family curse." And she was so cross and so furious, and I felt terrible. She has subsequently died, but her son, who is 57 years of age, started on treatment in January of this year because I, like many other people, had chosen to go public. I mean, what a story. And at this stage, since my diagnosis in 2019, there are now 8 cousins affected in my generation so far, and all on treatment. I'm not saying I am in any way special. I'm just emphasizing I made the decision to go public, and I had no idea at that stage how far-reaching that was going to be. Some of my family members, some of my cousins have told me to get lost. That was not the language that they used. It was much, much stronger Irish language than that. Mind your own business. But at the end of the day, you've just got to take that. People are entitled to respond and react however they want. It's not maybe sometimes an easy decision, but as was said here, you know, it's an act of responsibility, it's an act of morality, and it's most certainly an act of love. And as Vince said, there are so many options for treatment now. So I like to think that if there is such a thing as an afterlife, that my aunt is looking down on me now with a completely different approach now that her son is on treatment.
Yeah. I think it's very important that somebody in the family steps up and takes that role, because families are very difficult. So it's very important that someone gets above the parapet and makes sure, because especially in this day when there's lots of medication.
So I think we can move forward, and connecting to what we have discussed, I think the main topic is the role of genetic counseling also in managing communication about this genetic disease. And so it's my great pleasure to invite Professor Milena Paneque from Portugal to give her a speech connecting the dots, genetic counseling, when and how. Milena Paneque is very well known in this community. She has largely contributed many interesting studies on genetic counseling in hereditary ATTR amyloidosis. We are all learning from her work. She's a psychologist by background, but she became passionate about genetic counseling, and she has really contributed a lot to genetic counseling, not only in this field, but also as an advisor to implement genetic counseling procedures in Portugal and in Europe. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thanks to you, Laura, for this kind presentation, and thanks for the organization for inviting me. This is a lovely place, but I'm more than happy to be with you, the patients, my patients, the Portuguese representation of the association, and the topic of genetic counseling in this program. I think we have had a very well-connected program during this afternoon. Everyone is like reinforcing the same idea. I would like to do the same. So coming from a center with a long tradition of predictive testing, specifically for predictive testing of amyloidosis, and a program that was pioneered for doing that with genetic counseling and psychosocial support and research, as Laura mentioned. This center was a continuity of seminal work of Professor Dr. Corino D'Andrade and Dr. Paula Coutinho in Portugal. And besides the field trips at the very beginning, we established this national protocol, and then it was possible later, like about 30 years now, a national program for saying to at-risk relative if they are going to receive the mutation and then they are going to have the disease as one of their parents. I would like to start with this phrase, this idea, because I think we have been talking about this today. I don't know what awaits us, but I know what worries me, and I really identify myself with this phrase. And it is that medicine, excited by science, seduced by technology, and full of bureaucracy, as we have been talking today as well, will erase its human face and ignore the unique individuality of each person who suffers. Because although more and more ways to treat are invented, are available, no way has yet been discovered to alleviate suffering without empathy or compassion. And this is the profession I choose, a profession who underlies in empathy and compassion. It's a profession that tries to help people affected or at risk to understand and to adapt, to comprehend and to cope with the disease in the terms of the medical aspects, the psychological aspects, and familial implications of the genetic contributions to the disease. So I would say it's mostly about empathy and compassion. Besides the obvious component about the clinical aspects, the prognosis, the treatment, and all this, our consultations can be a talk about fears, and we have been talking about fears during this afternoon as well. In one hand, it can be a talk about the fear of the unknown. Having this family history sometimes rise these fears about what the future holds. The fear of developing the disease, what is going to happen if I pass the disease to my children, the fear of having these physical symptoms and all the emotional burden we know from other relatives, and we need to be able to talk about it. Sometimes it's the fear of blame or guilt, and we have been mentioning the guilt around this afternoon. To pass the condition that it was found in the family, they may make us to feel this sense of guilt, believing that we are somehow responsible for this. So genetic counselors are trained to be able to understand those complex emotions of the patients, and we need to have this kind of principle, patients' emotions make a lot of difference in the care we offer. So we need to create this safe and non-judgmental space where individuals and families can verbalize all these fears, can normalize these feelings, because we know this is a common feeling for many of the relatives or affected people, that it's normal to feel scared, anxious, overwhelmed in this situation, and we need to be able to provide this emotional support and help the clients or the consultants and the patients to navigate this difficult moment. Sometimes we are talking about the fears of making wrong decisions, and I'm very happy to talk about Lionel because he was saying this is a decision. What we can do is to support people to make an informed decision, not saying this is mandatory. But this is a very complex decision, and sometimes we feel pressured by the family. You need to take the test because everyone takes the test after the majority of age. And this is very complicated as well. So sometimes the patients arrive to the consultation saying, I'm not completely sure I'm taking the right decision or if I'm doing wrong. So it's not only about the decision of making the test, because sometimes people think that going to a genetic counseling consultation means to do a genetic test. And I would say to all the patient association, this is wrong. What you can do in helping to inform the others and the whole society is that having a genetic counseling consultation is a moment for being informed and take a proper decision. So it doesn't mean really to going for a genetic test, but going for seek of informants and support. So we are trained in this way to establish or to see the patients as our own teachers. They know better than us what makes sense to their own story of life, the family values, the personal values, and we need to support this autonomy. We have been researching about these kind of fears and specifically about the stigmatization, because stigma is present, is unfortunately the reality of many of the countries. In my country, still being part of this, how the society looks at the disease. And sometimes the consultation of genetic counselors can be only about to talk about how individuals feel worried about the genetic condition will affect their social life, their relationships, their ability to get insurance, employment, and things like this that are really part of the reality. And we were doing some research about it, and we prove or evidence that all this is part of the daily life of the patients and their families. So in another study, we were looking about this kind of a stigma, and we noticed that that is why it's important to raise the awareness of the whole society, of other healthcare professionals that sometimes didn't know about this disease or the conditions, and that's why we need specific training programs also for healthcare professionals on the potential stigma attached to these inherited conditions and how to implement national strategies for reducing this stigmatization as well. Sometimes it's the only content of one genetic counseling consultation. Some patients need help about how they can talk about and explain the disease in the family. Educate patients on the genetic conditions impact is important, but also highlighting the importance of informing others and how they can do their own decisions and their own informed decisions about doing the test. But also, we need to be able to talk about the specific family plan, dissemination plans, because sometimes we map the literature and we conduct other studies that reinforce that the practice is very heterogeneous. Professionals are not able, don't know how to approach this in the consultation. And so if the professionals cannot help the patients how they're going to manage this difficult task. It's a complex task. It's a very difficult and complex role for the ones who are the ones who share the information in the family. So we are aware of this. We conduct this recently study and about what to tell, how to tell, and when to tell. We discovered that most of the times are the women who start this conversation, that assuming this role of gathering the information and disseminating across the whole family. But of course, the stigmatization and the fear of discrimination are barriers to this communication, and feelings of responsibility, as you said before, are some of the strong motivators for doing that communication. But a genetic counseling session can be also a talk about hopes, and this is a picture of an example of a group intervention we conduct with patients and caregivers through a Tree of Life tool, where we use metaphors to talk about what are the strange, the branches, the hopes, the significant people of our patients, and to try to empower them to look at their new strategies and things they can do and manage to talk about their diseases and to cope with the diseases. But it can be also not to talk. And this is also important. It's very important. The moments of silence are not empty, are very significant, are very important for the patients sometimes to understand complex information, to process very impactful information as well. It's a moment for them to find their own words in a conversation about something very personal and significant, but it's also for us important to promote active listening, demonstrating empathy, and it can be very, very powerful because we are saying, I'm with you in this difficult moment, and we don't need to talk to say that sometimes. What else we know? We know that main motivations for going to a genetic counseling consultations are the reproductive plans, the decision on understanding the risk, the genetic risk, the psychological preparation, and the relief of certainty. But we are aware because many of people who can benefit from genetic counseling session are not going to the consultation. So I think it's also important that you, the patient associations, work with this, help with this, because again, going to a session is not going for a performance of a genetic test, but it's important to go there. So sometimes we miss people that really benefit from what we can share, what we can talk together. And we don't know yet what works better in which circumstances during our consultation, and even we don't know yet how to better prepare healthcare to be competent for this effective practice, because we are talking about understand and adapt, and this is very, very specific. But I would say it's really, really important to integrate not only genetic counselors, but also other healthcare professionals that have been here during this afternoon, raising how better we can care all the patients and the families if we have this holistic approach. The contrary that the image is showing you, and I think it's important to understand this. This is really an urgency, really something that we need. We can have all these roles, patient advocacy, literacy promotion, research, working for reducing stigmatization, informed health policies. That is important. I'm very pleased to say for the Italian families that is already an educational offer here in Italy, a master program in genetic counseling, and the same in Porto, but it's not so extent in the whole Europe. It's just a few programs that are really right now educating people, new genetic counselors. But this is a hope. You will have this kind of professionals here. The same in Spain. We have another master program there. So I think it's important to count with them. I'm just going to share some pictures that are really, really significant for me. Some of the patients are not with us anymore. And this is the kind of things that we can help also with other initiatives that the patients' associations, because they are really, really more resilient than us and more active than us, and teach us every day about how to do that. So we try to accompany this as genetic counselors, as part of our little group in Portugal, but I think it can be the same in at the European level, to go to the health forums, to the works they are doing for raising the awareness, to the schools to talk about rare diseases, about how to help a person who is affected or have any kind of disability. And this is a project we have together with the National Umbrella Association in Portugal for Rare Diseases to commemorate the Rare Disease Day. And I would like to thank for this opportunity. I'm able to speak with at the end for any questions, but I think it's important to reinforce genetic counseling as a communication process. It's not only about the medical issues. It's also about the feelings, the fears, the hopes, and we need to be able to talk about it in a consultation. Of course, amyloidosis is a genetic disease. We are talking about the family disease, and we need a family perspective and approach to fully understand the impact that the disease has. A multidisciplinary approach is essential, where all these new or not so new, but professionals that have been contributing from their own professions to the better care of our patients be together in an holistic approach. That is urgent, and the connection with you, the Patients Association, that I believe is critical for the daily support of our patients and their family. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was really a fantastic talk. Thanks so much for sharing your experience, your thoughts. Is there any question, comment for? Yes, Giovanni, please.
It's a little bit articulated my question, so I hope that you give some minutes to explain, because I would like to touch different aspects from the person that talked before, and also to be consequential with what I mentioned this morning when I asked the audience to do some discussion that will be very important for us. I give my experience, obviously. I totally agree with what Rosalind mentioned before, and the practice said that when my mother, after that we went in London in 1997, has been discovered the disease, we asked to her brother and her sister to make the test. My mother was 59, 60 at that stage, and also my mother got two children, my brother and I, and both of us make the test. My aunt and my uncle negative, fortunately, my brother and I positive. So no doubt that at that stage is totally correct to perform the test. What I am in doubt, to be honest, also in my situation, because my mutation is a late onset, so it's something that I stress and you have to put in consideration, otherwise will be misunderstanding what I say. What I am in doubt is the testing for my son and daughter, and I have also the responsibility of the son and daughter of my of my brother that left us in 2018. What I want to say is, considering that my disease, at least the symptom, I probably start before, but could be roughly about 50 something years old. My daughter 26, my son 24. Why now I have to suggest them to make a test, and it could be probably in the condition of the father of Lionel, I don't know where you are, Lionel, that if in case of positive, this will be a great burden, to be honest. And the last point, and I mentioned to you, pardon for that, was another thing instead what I would like to mention about Stefano, the gentleman that talked before in Italian, that he spoke about the disease, and I totally accept. But for example, I am still working. I am a tax advisor, so self-employed. I have no parachute. And what I would like to say is, in a world where all of us need to be perfect shape and great shape, and I go to my client, sometimes when I walk the stairs, I have some difficulties. When I wake up, I have the imbalance. When Laura, that is my doctor, for example, asks me the 24 hours urine checking during the week, if I have to go to my client, obviously I go with a bag that cover everything, but I have to go to the toilet. I go and I perform my test. What I would like to say, probably for me, I tell it to my friends, in my family, obviously, all that know, but I'm not so trained or comfortable, trained to tell to the other that I have the disease, apart if someone know that I lost 10 kilos, that I walk with difficulties. When I take the pen, sometimes, it's like the soap that go in. So I would like to put on the table all, and I excuse for how long was my question, but it's articulated in 3 different. Thank you very much.
Milena, can I interrupt and just say that my talk is going to be about...
I was about to say that. I don't know where you are. But yes, I know we have this discussion right after. And it's a really complex discussion.
Okay.
But thanks for your sharing as well.
So, it's a burning question to Milena? Yes. Otherwise, we will postpone to the discussion in the end. It's okay? So we can have all the different perspectives in the end. So thank you so much, Milena, really, for your talk.
The next speaker is Emily Dixon from the UK. She's currently going to talk about the controversies and debates, the pros and cons of early diagnosis and tests. Emily is now started working at the Royal Free in London, which is the National Amyloid Centre. She was previously working at Guy's Hospital in St Thomas's in London, and genetic counsellor for prenatal patients. And we're very glad to have her here today, and we're very lucky to have her in London, because we've been waiting many, many years for a counsellor. Thank you.
Thank you. No pressure then at all. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a hard act to follow, and I'm sort of slowly, only in my first year of amyloid genetic counselling, so I've got a little way to go to catch up there. So just a few disclosures that I've represented genetic counselling in talks, and we are going to be talking about opinions, so some of them may be my own. So let's get this started. So yes, I have 15 minutes to talk about a very, very large and very in-depth conversation, as you were already implying with your question. And so I thought maybe we can start by trying to define some parameters of this quite loose title. And maybe the first that's quite obvious, hopefully, is that we're going to be talking in relation to hereditary ATTR amyloidosis. And whilst there are probably going to be overlaps in other forms of hereditary amyloid, the particular focus today is on ATTR. So we need to think about, well, what type of genetic testing are we actually talking about here when we say genetics? What are we defining as early? Whose perspective are we considering when we're thinking about pros and cons? And then we can sort of bring it all together to guide the discussion. So when we think about genetic testing, we can look at it in several different ways, and that can include, the type of test and how we test. And whilst there are many different types, these are probably the three most common that you might have come across. So we can think about diagnostic genetic testing, and that's when somebody's affected with a condition, and we're trying to confirm that clinical diagnosis in themselves. Predictive is when someone has a family history of a genetic condition and they have no symptoms themselves. So this is going to provide information as to whether someone's going to be at risk of developing the condition and maybe go on to have those features. And I've mentioned carrier testing here, mainly because the language around carriers sometimes used differently by different people. So from a very strict genetic perspective, a carrier is someone who only has a copy of an alteration in one gene, but it's to do with recessive conditions where both copies of the gene need to be altered for someone to have a clinical condition. Whereas a lot of people might think of themselves as carriers if they carry a genetic change but don't currently have symptoms yet. So I think it's just being sort of cautious about how that word gets used in different situations. So we're going to be thinking about the discussion of those having predictive genetic testing, and very briefly, trigger happy there. We're going to be thinking about the types of testing of the genes are either targeted single alteration, so that very particular family change, or we're going to be looking at maybe across the whole of the TTR gene, and that can sometimes be useful when there's been an unproven or an uncertain family history, and we're sort of seeing whether or not it was hereditary in the family. Okay. So when we think about early, we could think about, well, are we looking at adult versus childhood testing? But as it's sort of mentioned by quite a few people today, this condition is considered adult onset, and in many other countries as well, 18 years plus you're an adult, so you'd be eligible for predictive testing. Now, there are a few caveats to that, but I'm not going to go into detail about them today. And then when we think about, well, let's look at the TTR gene ourselves, we now know there's over 130 different pathogenic alterations, and they're going to each have a typical predictive sort of age of disease onset, which I'll reference as PADO here. And that's normally when we'd expect symptoms to start appearing in someone. And that figure can be calculated from looking at scientific literature from around the world. It may also be looking at patient data or even sort of what the family history is telling us. And it's probably worth mentioning that with the penetrance, so the proportion of people with a gene alteration who'll actually get the condition is going to vary through the different alterations as well. And this is a very helpful slide produced by our head of our NAC molecular genetic service. And whilst it doesn't have 130 alterations on here, it does show a typical predictive disease age on here for the specific alterations, and some examples if this works. We've got our sort of early onset VAL30M. We've got our sort of late onset version of that variant. We've got our T60As, and it's very trigger happy. We've got the V122I. So if we then think about our screening recommendations, because we can't really use age alone to define early, because for some variants that's going to be not soon enough, and for others it's going to be really, really far away. So screening recommendations are around the sort of 10 years before disease onset. And that's normally lower of whether it's the literature or whether it is from the patient's own family history. And if we add that to the table, I've put in a red line here to sort of roughly represent our 18 years of age, and then we've got our green to represent 10 years off the predicted age of disease onset. We could consider early genetic testing as anyone who sort of falls in this region here, or maybe just around the line. So there are people who, as you were mentioning in your question there, that they're too early to have screening, but they are sort of not going to have any immediate management or intervention on finding out if they are at risk. So when we think about perspective, we're looking at things like, are we thinking about the patients, so their own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, experiences? We're also going to be looking at it from clinical healthcare teams, so that's genetic counselors, doctors, nurses, and all the other specialists. And we can also look at it from kind of a general wider healthcare issue. So if I was going to bring all of those points together, we might come up with a new title of the possible pros and cons from both a patient and healthcare perspective of predictive genetic testing for hereditary ATTR amyloidosis alterations before the typical age of screening based on PADO. But that's a little bit more of a mouthful, so we made it pros and cons of early genetic testing. So I'm going to bring some sort of general pros and cons, and some of these may have already come up on talks today. I've been jotting things down as we've been going through today. This is obviously just a small field of possible scenarios, so I'm always open for people coming to find me afterwards if they think I've missed something hugely important off one of these. So one of the benefits some people we're already thinking about is obviously this early screening, but I've defined early testing as before they can have intervention management. So how does that factor in? Well, there's some evidence in general literature to suggest that individuals with positive genetic test results have higher rates of adherence to recommended screening compared to those that weren't tested or tested negative. And although some of them have used cancer, genetics as an example, I think those kinds of ideas can be extrapolated that patients who are health conscious, wanting to know if they may be at risk, are more likely to be the ones that will be turning up as soon as the screening doors are open to them. And we could also consider those that may want to make changes to their lifestyle. I often get asked, is there anything I should be doing now to try and make it better for when I may develop symptoms? And I was thinking about that earlier, and from Alan's talk, for example, that things like strength training can be beneficial. Why not start that early and get into the good habits beforehand, if not already? We can also look at access to trials and research. So if a patient's aware of their genetic status, we may have more pools of candidates who could come forward for potential trials and research in future that might be looking at pre-symptomatic or sort of pre-amyloid treatments, and maybe even work that's looking at disease penetrance. And, sorry, it's jumping all over the place today. But we can also ask that there'd be less of a chance that they may be overlooked as possible candidates if they're already registered on a system somewhere as being a gene positive, in this case, carrier. So we can also then take it from a family perspective, and again, we've sort of seen that from some people who may have already sort of seen the condition in their family. Perhaps they've been carers themselves, so they've got that added sort of psychological element of knowing that they may also be at risk of the condition that they're caring for in a family member. We can also see people that might want to be saving up potentially for future care, putting some money aside in case it might be needed later in their life. And one other element that's sort of slowly coming forward is things around family planning. So couples who may want to think about avoiding passing on the condition, and they will therefore be likely to want to come a lot earlier than the typical age of onset that may be in their family, because it's around the time that they're family planning. So for example, with our very late onset forms, if you're not having screening until your 50s or 60s, that's after potentially your childbearing ages, so you may wish to come sooner to have that information to influence your family planning, but not your sort of current screening abilities. And then we've also got patients' own thoughts, feelings, beliefs to consider, and the phrase that I hear so much often and was echoed a lot today is, I'd rather know than not know. and the idea that knowledge is power, that perhaps they'll be going down a very different path to family members who didn't have that prior knowledge. We know that there are, wanting information for their family, and closely linked to these kinds of ideas are principles of healthcare ethics. So we have the autonomy that the patient must be allowed to make their own decision according to their own values and beliefs, and that's whether a medical practitioner feels that those choices are in the patient's best interest. A patient is allowed to make a decision, even if we don't feel it might be the right one. We can only guide them. And justice. So the idea of justice is that there's an element of fairness in all medical decisions. So we've got to look at burden and benefit and share resources so that we can allow people to have that decision-making ability. So moving on for some possible cons, which was a little bit harder to think about. So we've got the other side of that psychological perspective. So finding out their genetic status too early might increase anxiety. They might find it harder. There's the burden of not knowing what could happen in the future. And we know that in some genetic conditions, there can be an increase in what we call symptom watching. So individuals become highly attuned to very minor bodily changes, turning normal experiences into perceived symptoms of an impending illness. And I think with the very ambiguous nature of some of those very early signs, it can be quite hard to potentially separate that out if that's going to be your typical way of thinking. So again, if this is occurring before the age of screening, where they'll be able to get answers as to whether that's related or not, it could increase a patient's mental burden. And there may be implications for the future. So with regards to issues around insurance, for example, which is a form of genetic discrimination. And whilst I should stress that in the UK, that's not as much of a concern due to a code of conduct between Association of British Insurers and the government, it may not be the same in other countries. So getting a genetic result before it's medically relevant for an individual could be harmful for their future. And then potentially more of a limitation to the genetic testing, but we need to consider things like resources. And for example, access to genetic counselling could be quite limited for some, and that may be due to geographical, financial reasons, availability of counsellors. And it could mean that they go unavailable to get genetic testing at all, which goes against our idea of the principle of justice, or that they didn't have sufficient information and support before taking the test, which could increase the risk of post-decisional regret if they weren't aware of that full implication. And potentially from a technology viewpoint, if we've got a large number of people who are at risk but they're not eligible for screening yet, and that potentially could be quite far in the future. I've got patients who it's going to be 10, 15 years time for them. We need to have a way of doing robust follow-ups in space to ensure screening appointments are going to be offered at the right time. We don't want people slipping through the net because our hospital system's unable to kind of book that far in advance, or we've changed systems in between. So there's a bit of an onus between sort of relying on the patient and the healthcare team to try and find a way of ensuring that those patients are going to come back. And hopefully linked to one of my earlier benefits is that most people who are coming forward because they want to know are doing it because they want to be able to access the screening when possible. So there might be that added benefit that they're going to be more of the type that will be calling us up to make sure that those appointments are being booked in the right time frame. So I wouldn't be advocating for my profession if I didn't have a slide on genetic counselling, but I think Milena's presentation kind of covered everything I needed to say on the topic and beyond. And I think it's really important for genetic counselling, particularly in the context of predictive testing before medical intervention is available, even more so to be able to have that time to go through and really understand all of those different implications of the genetic contribution to disease and promote those informed choices. So I'm going to wrap up there, but I am very happy for anyone to come and find me later for a discussion around genetic testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was very enlightening and very relevant for everybody here in this room. Is there any questions? Please.
Thank you very much. This was a very interesting presentation. I would like to come back on the point you talk about life insurance. So I experienced the same issue when I wanted to borrow money to buy my last flat. I could not succeed to have insurance, so I had to stop to borrow money. I could borrow money from a relative. And I have also the experience of a friend. So you can do genetic testing, and if you are asymptomatic, you're not forced to declare the disease. In France, we have a status which is named long duration disease. If you have this status, you don't pay for tests, you don't pay for medicine, you don't need to pay and be reimbursed, but you have this status. And when you're filling some questionnaire for an insurance, they ask you, do you have this status? And if you don't want to lie, then you need to explain, and you will be exposed, and you can face the same issue. So my advice would be, if you are asymptomatic, you know that you have the gene mutation, please keep that confidential, and then you may fill in questionnaire. You have a gene mutation, but you're not sick. So if you ask as a normal, if you fill in as a normal person, that will be accepted. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know the next topic is all about sort of financial implications, and I do think it does vary from country to country. So, for example, in the UK, as I said, there's a code of conduct. So if you've had predictive genetic testing and you're gene positive, aside from, I think it's Huntington's disease, if you're looking for anything over, I think, 500,000, where you do have to declare it, which is why some patients test first, like they get their life insurance and then they test afterwards because they don't have to go back and declare. But other than that, everyone is protected, so you don't have to declare anything to do with, life insurance or income protection. So whilst they might ask about family conditions or hereditary conditions in the family, and again, it's a similar process, you have to answer honestly or you could risk it being invalid. You don't have to declare, and they cannot ask you if you've had an at-risk test. So it does protect a lot of patients, and that's one thing that often comes up about, oh, well, I'm worried about insurance, and it's kind of a non-starter in the UK with the sort of agreement in place, which is a benefit. But as you said, it's not the same for other countries, and I think that's quite an important thing to, for patients to be aware that it will vary from place to place, and factoring that into your decision making is huge, especially in these earlier stages.
Yep, question.
It's a quick comment about what you share. We have law in Portugal for protecting specifically the confidentiality in the context of predictive testing. But that is another area where we need to educate patients, because some of them arrive to the consultation for a kind of declaration they need for getting an insurance, of getting a credit for buying a house. Sometimes they need to understand that they are not obliged to share and they are protected by law. Any kind of discrimination is, by law, can be informed to the authorities as well. So it's important to talk about this in the consultation and in every specific countries, because we have different contexts.
Which is also a shame, I should add, that we do have such differences across different countries around that when it's genetic knowledge, and when families are spread out all over the globe, to have one family member protected by the country's policies and another family member facing a very different situation. It's quite challenging.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one more question. Anybody? Okay, I'm sure Emily will be able to answer questions later, if need be. If we'll carry on now to our next speaker.
Yeah, so this topic brings perfectly to the final talk of this session and this day. We are really honored to have Dominique Thierry. She's attending virtually, and Dominique Thierry is a French lawyer, and she has founded a non-profitable association that provides legal support for people that deal with difficulties with legal and financial aspects related to disease and disability. She has built on a personal experience to create this association, which is called Jury Santé, and she is a person that provides advice also to the French Association for Amyloidosis. So thank you very much, Dominique, for accepting our invitation and for participating. Thanks a lot.
Merci beaucoup de m'accueillir. Je suis désolée de ne pas pouvoir être présente avec vous. Et en plus, comme je suis à distance, j'ai choisi de vous parler en français, mais je pense que vous avez d'excellents traducteurs qui pourront traduire mes propos. Donc, effectivement, moi, j'interviens sur l'impact financier et professionnel de l'amylose et comment y faire face. Donc, déjà, effectivement, on l'a bien compris pendant toute la journée aujourd'hui, que l'amylose, elle a effectivement des conséquences. Elle a des conséquences au niveau social, au niveau financier, au niveau professionnel également. Et c'est souvent une question qui reste dans l'ombre, mais c'est une question qui va concerner à la fois les patients, les proches aidants, les familles, les professionnels de santé, les services sociaux, mais également les responsables politiques. Là, on le voit bien, vous avez évoqué juste maintenant la question de l'assurance. Les politiques ont un rôle à jouer pour aménager les lois, pour mieux prendre en compte l'accessibilité aux différentes formes d'assurance par les personnes malades. Donc, je vais donc évoquer l'impact de l'amylose sur la vie réelle. Tout d'abord en évoquant les impacts sur l'emploi. Les personnes qui deviennent symptomatiques, malades, effectivement risquent d'avoir des arrêts de travail répétés, des nécessités d'ajustement, peut-être travailler à temps partiel, effectuer du télétravail quand c'est compatible avec la profession, adapter les missions qui leur sont confiées, demander des aménagements de poste. Donc ça, c'est des choses que vous avez également évoquées dans la journée, avec bien sûr des conséquences financières lorsque on modifie son rythme de travail. Vous aviez évoqué la question de parents qui diminuent leur temps de travail. Là, il s'agissait d'aidants, mais c'est la même chose pour les personnes qui sont malades. C'est aussi le risque d'interruption de carrière ou de ralentissement de la progression, la crainte beaucoup d'une mise au placard si jamais la personne révèle sa pathologie, ou d'une mise au placard simplement parce que l'employeur réalise que la personne va avoir différents arrêts et que du coup il ne veut plus lui confier ou il ne veut plus la faire progresser dans son métier. Il y a également pour certains le risque d'une perte d'emploi, d'une déconnexion professionnelle qui peut résulter justement de la mise au placard, du ralentissement de la progression de la carrière, mais aussi un risque de désinsertion professionnelle lorsque le métier exercé ne peut plus être exercé du fait des symptômes de l'amylose. Et ensuite, vous l'aviez également évoqué en courant de l'après-midi, la problématique de la stigmatisation qui peut également arriver en entreprise, ou l'absence de compréhension. Là, on est plutôt sur les questions en lien avec les salariés ou les fonctionnaires en France, puisqu'en France, on a les salariés du privé et on a les fonctionnaires, c'est les personnes qui travaillent pour l'État, mais ça concerne bien évidemment également les entrepreneurs qui sont aussi confrontés à des difficultés par rapport, eux aussi, à des arrêts de travail, au fait à ne pas pouvoir réaliser une mission pour un client, et ce qui va également amener un certain nombre de difficultés. Tout ça, ça a effectivement un impact sur les finances de la personne, sur ses capacités financières, sur sa sécurité financière, je dirais, puisque cela peut entraîner des pertes de revenus, des pertes d'emploi, une réduction de l'activité, un arrêt de travail, de l'invalidité. Selon les pays, les indemnités journalières qui peuvent être servies pendant l'arrêt de travail sont plus ou moins importantes. La sécurité financière en lien avec le travail et l'ancienneté au travail, avec des maintiens de salaire par l'employeur divers, sont également différentes d'un pays à l'autre en Europe. Et ensuite, il y a également la question du passage en invalidité. En France, par exemple, une fois que vous êtes en arrêt de travail en lien avec une affection de longue durée, donc en lien avec l'amylose par exemple, vous avez droit à des indemnités journalières de date à date pendant 3 ans. Au-delà de cette période, il y aura une mise en invalidité, un placement en invalidité qui, à ce moment-là, sera indemnisé via la pension d'invalidité, qui là aussi peut être complétée, peut être complétée, là, dans ce cas-là, par une prévoyance, si tant est qu'il y a une obligation d'assurance de l'employeur pour permettre d'obtenir cette assurance et le complément de salaire. C'est la même chose pour les indépendants. S'ils ont bien prévu de s'assurer par rapport à un risque de perte de salaire au niveau des indemnités journalières ou au niveau d'une invalidité, mais là, il y aura un relais pour compléter la pension d'invalidité. Dans les autres cas, ça signe parfois une entrée dans la précarité. Donc, il peut aussi y avoir, en termes d'impact sur la charge financière, des restes à charge de dépenses médicales, donc des dépenses qui ne sont pas remboursées ou de manière incomplète par l'assurance maladie, des dépassements d'honoraires qui ne sont pas pris en charge dans le cadre de l'assurance maladie, qui peuvent l'être dans le cadre d'autres d'assurances complémentaires santé ou mutuelles en France, mais encore faut-il avoir ce type d'assurance là aussi. Et puis, en France, on a également la problématique des franchises médicales et de la participation forfaitaire, qui est un ticket qui reste à charge, qui est une somme d'argent qui va rester à charge de la personne malade, avec un impact qui peut aussi être assez important si la personne a peu de ressources financières. Ensuite, il y a également des coûts supplémentaires qui peuvent parfois ne pas être pris en charge. C'est du transport, de la nutrition adaptée, du matériel médical, du yoga, par exemple, des choses que vous avez pu évoquer au cours de la journée. Alors, vous venez d'évoquer ce sujet, l'impact sur l'accès à l'assurance, qui reste un défi majeur dans la majorité des pays. Donc, sachant qu'en France, les résultats d'analyse, les résultats de tests génétiques ne sont absolument pas communicables à l'assureur. L'assureur n'a absolument aucun droit de vous les demander. Et si vous les communiquez par inadvertance ou parce que vous pensiez qu'il fallait les communiquer, même s'il les a reçus, l'assureur ne peut pas en tenir compte. Néanmoins, par rapport à ça, ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que les personnes qui ont des antécédents de maladies graves ou en tout cas qui ont une maladie chronique font face à des surprimes, à des exclusions, parfois même un refus de couverture pour les assurances de prêt. Pour les assurances prévoyance, donc ce sont les assurances qui permettent d'avoir un maintien de salaire dans le cas où on est en arrêt maladie ou en invalidité, et également se pose la même problématique pour les assurances voyage. Alors, en France, on a eu une évolution historique en 2022, puisque dorénavant, il y a une loi qui permet aux particuliers de souscrire une assurance de prêt sans remplir de questionnaire médical, mais ceci sous réserve que 2 conditions soient remplies. Le prêt ne doit pas excéder 200 000 € par personne et le prêt doit être remboursé avant le 60e anniversaire de l'emprunteur. Si on a réussi à obtenir ça en France, c'est grâce à un travail interassociatif. Un grand nombre d'associations se sont posées sur cette problématique du non-accès aux assurances de prêt en France et ont agi auprès des députés et des sénateurs qu'ils connaissaient afin d'obtenir le passage de cette loi. Donc il s'agit véritablement d'une révolution pour les personnes qui sont atteintes de maladies chroniques, puisque grâce à cette loi, on va pouvoir obtenir une assurance de prêt. Néanmoins, cette loi a ses limites. La principale qui est vraiment impactante, c'est le fait que le prêt doit être remboursé avant le 60e anniversaire de l'emprunteur. Nous sommes de nombreuses associations en France à vouloir refaire des actions de lobbying afin de faire évoluer cet âge vers plutôt 70 ans, voire 71 ans. Mais vu le contexte actuel, c'est un peu compliqué de faire du plaidoyer. Donc, on constate pourtant que cette mesure, même si elle est historique et extrêmement importante, en fait, elle concerne surtout la population plus jeune, alors que le diagnostic, dans le cas de l'amylose, est souvent plus tardif et va empêcher de facto les personnes de pouvoir bénéficier de cette loi. Donc il est nécessaire d'étendre les protections en augmentant la limite d'âge et en adaptant les critères d'admissibilité pour tenir compte des trajectoires réelles des personnes atteintes de maladies graves et chroniques. Et c'est un travail, à mon sens, qui doit être fait effectivement en France, mais aussi dans tous les autres pays, afin de pouvoir lutter contre ce type de discrimination qui sont néanmoins autorisées, puisque les assureurs ont le droit de calculer le risque assurantiel qu'ils prennent en assurant des personnes pour notamment les assurances de prêt. Donc gérer et anticiper, c'est une approche à plusieurs niveaux à mon sens. Je pense qu'il faut s'autoriser à demander de l'aide tôt après le diagnostic auprès des travailleurs sociaux dans les hôpitaux ou dans les milieux communautaires. Donc en France, on a effectivement des assistants sociaux au sein des mairies ou au sein en proximité des domiciles des patients. On a aussi des associations de patients. En France, il y a l'AFCA qui fait un travail remarquable et avec laquelle nous avons effectivement eu l'occasion de collaborer à plusieurs reprises justement pour accompagner les patients qui se retrouvaient en difficulté, que ce soit au niveau du travail ou de la sécurité sociale, en tout cas qui connaissaient des difficultés juridiques. Des associations spécialisées telles que Juris Santé en France qui fournissent un conseil juridique et social et accompagnent ou aident à la réflexion et facilitent la navigation dans les systèmes administratifs et légaux complexes. Et puis également les services spécialisés de soutien à l'emploi. Chez nous, il y a Cap Emploi, mais dans tous les, voilà, il faut s'adresser aux services qui peuvent être le plus soutenants. Et donc en proximité, voir quelles sont les structures qui vont pouvoir proposer une aide. Ensuite, il est extrêmement important pour les patients de connaître leurs droits, de savoir effectivement quelles sont les conditions d'indemnisation des congés de maladie ou d'invalidité lorsque malheureusement on doit être placé en invalidité parce qu'on ne peut plus travailler ou que la capacité de travail a été très diminuée. Connaître ses droits face à l'employeur, là aussi, ils vont être, pour certaines choses comme les congés payés acquis pendant la maladie, pendant l'arrêt de travail, là on a une réglementation européenne, mais il y a néanmoins des droits qui peuvent être différents par rapport aux employeurs selon les pays, donc c'est important de savoir quels sont ces droits face à l'employeur dans le pays où l'on réside. La possibilité d'obtenir une reconnaissance en tant que travailleur handicapé. C'est un dispositif qui existe en France et qui permet à la personne qui obtient cette reconnaissance d'avoir un accompagnement dédié et d'avoir un certain nombre de protections qui vont lui permettre de pouvoir continuer son travail avec des financements, par exemple, d'aménagement de poste. Il faut également connaître les dispositifs et aides qui peuvent compenser de faibles revenus, puisque, comme je l'ai déjà précisé, malheureusement, l'entrée dans l'arrêt de travail ou l'entrée dans une situation d'invalidité, eh bien, ça peut conditionner aussi une entrée dans la précarité. Et là, selon les pays, il faut également voir qu'est-ce qui peut être proposé par le gouvernement pour compenser cette perte de revenus. En France, nous avons l'allocation adulte handicapé qui peut venir effectivement compléter ou remplacer un revenu. Et pour les personnes qui ont des carrières qui sont en dents de scie du fait de la pathologie, il y a également la possibilité d'obtenir l'allocation de solidarité pour les personnes âgées qui garantissent un minimum de retraite en cas de pension de retraite faible. Enfin, vous avez également la possibilité d'obtenir des indemnisations et accompagnements en cas de perte d'autonomie. Là aussi, c'est à regarder pays par pays. En France, il y a deux grands... on a jusqu'à 60 ans et à partir de 60 ans, avec des possibilités d'obtenir, soit via la maison départementale des personnes handicapées, des aménagements du domicile, des aides humaines, des aides au transport, et pour les personnes qui ont plus de 60 ans et surtout qui ne sont plus en activité professionnelle, là on va dépendre du conseil départemental. Mais voilà, donc ce que je vous recommande, c'est véritablement d'aller regarder en proximité dans votre pays ce qui peut vous être proposé. Ensuite, c'est bien évidemment essayer de préserver l'emploi tant qu'il est possible de le préserver. Donc, faire adapter le lieu de travail avec l'aide du médecin du travail, si ce dispositif existe dans votre pays. En France, on a effectivement accès pour les salariés, mais également dans la fonction publique, aux médecins du travail, aux médecins de prévention, qui va aider à adapter le poste de travail, les missions, la flexibilité horaire, etc., de manière à pouvoir continuer à travailler dans des conditions favorables au regard de l'état de santé. Cet accès aux médecins du travail a également été étendu en France aux indépendants, sous réserve qu'ils s'affilient à un service de santé au travail. Mais donc voilà, ce que je recommande, c'est vérifier ce qu'il en est dans votre pays, mais c'est véritablement le médecin du travail a un rôle véritablement clé dans la préservation de l'emploi. Envisager une reconversion professionnelle ou une mobilité professionnelle accompagnée lorsqu'on se rend compte que le poste de travail, l'emploi occupé ne sera pas compatible avec l'évolution de l'état de santé. En France, à ce titre-là, on peut d'ailleurs, pendant un arrêt de travail, avec l'accord de son médecin traitant et l'accord du médecin conseil de la sécurité sociale, on pourra, en France, effectuer un bilan de compétences, voire une formation pendant l'arrêt de travail. Ne pas hésiter à explorer des options comme le temps partiel qui peut être mis en place en France là aussi pendant l'arrêt de travail, et c'est ce qu'on appelle le temps partiel thérapeutique, qui permet d'avoir à la fois le versement des indemnités journalières de la sécurité sociale complété par le paiement des heures effectivement payées par l'employeur. Et lorsque on est en pension d'invalidité, on pourra effectivement cumuler le montant de la pension d'invalidité avec les heures prestées pour un employeur ou à titre en tant qu'indépendant, ce qui permettra de cumuler les deux ressources et donc d'avoir moins de risques de se retrouver en situation de précarité. Ne pas donc hésiter à utiliser le bilan de compétences pour redéfinir son parcours professionnel en tenant compte des nouvelles contraintes, puisque là, ce qui est véritablement important, c'est vraiment d'arriver à être dans l'acceptation des nouvelles contraintes pour que ce bilan de compétences puisse être efficace et permettre de suivre une formation qui conduise à un emploi adapté. Je recommande également de planifier l'avenir, c'est-à-dire anticiper la perte de revenus en cas d'arrêt de travail ou de placement en invalidité, de manière, tant qu'on travaille, effectivement, peut-être se constituer une épargne qui pourra servir dans cette situation. Envisager une réorientation professionnelle, comme je l'ai déjà précisé, de manière assez tôt, de manière à ne pas être pris à la dernière minute avec très peu de choix possibles. Comprendre également l'impact de la diminution de l'activité professionnelle ou des arrêts de travail répétés ou de la mise en invalidité sur les droits à la retraite qui vont être différents d'un pays à l'autre. Est-ce que les trimestres vont être crédités ? Est-ce qu'il y a une possibilité de retraite anticipée pour maladie chronique? Est-ce qu'on va pouvoir partir à la retraite à taux plein ou pas du fait de la pathologie? En France, c'est le cas. Les personnes qui sont malades et qui arrivent à l'âge de 62 ans et ne peuvent pas continuer leur activité professionnelle peuvent obtenir une retraite pour inaptitude, mais pour laquelle ils partiront à taux plein sans décote. Donc, vérifier également ces contrats d'assurance, que ce soit crédit, prévoyance, complémentaire santé, de manière à le jour venu, pouvoir les actionner. Vous seriez étonné du nombre de personnes qui appellent la ligne téléphonique de Juris Santé et qui n'avaient absolument pas pensé à demander leur garantie aux assurances, puisqu'il y a l'accès aux assurances, mais vous pouvez aussi être diagnostiqué alors que vous aviez déjà contracté un crédit. Ensuite, connaître les aides financières qui peuvent être disponibles, que ce soit au niveau que ce soit des choses prévues au niveau du gouvernement, des dispositifs comme ce qui existe en France, l'allocation adulte handicapé ou l'ASPA, mais également qu'est-ce qui existe dans votre pays à vous. Demander de l'aide financière si nécessaire. Vous avez des commissions sociales au niveau des assurances de prévoyance, de la retraite, ou voire auprès d'associations caritatives qui peuvent, face à certaines situations de précarité ou de difficultés financières parfois ponctuelles, de donner un coup de main. Donc il faut accepter de demander de l'aide. Ensuite, vous l'avez largement évoqué en début d'après-midi, il y a un rôle véritablement très très important des aidants qui sont essentiels et qui doivent être reconnus, soutenus et protégés. En France, ça commence à voir le jour avec la possibilité pour les aidants qui doivent s'arrêter de travailler d'obtenir une allocation journalière de proche aidant, même si elle n'est pas encore complètement satisfaisante. Mais voilà, il faut absolument effectivement soutenir les aidants et pouvoir financer leur perte leur choix de diminuer, parfois ce n'est d'ailleurs pas toujours un choix non plus, mais lorsqu'ils sont contraints de diminuer leur activité professionnelle, c'est vraiment impératif qu'ils puissent être reconnus et surtout financés. En France, il y a également la possibilité pour les aidants qui s'arrêtent complètement de travailler de bénéficier d'une affiliation gratuite à la retraite afin qu'ils ne perdent pas trop au niveau de leur retraite. Ils peuvent parfois bénéficier de trimestres gratuits, enfin de l'ajout de trimestres au titre de l'aidance, et ils peuvent, dans certains cas, également obtenir une retraite à taux plein à 65 ans. Donc ça, c'est des choses où les responsables politiques sont véritablement acteurs, mais avant que les responsables politiques se saisissent de ces matières, très souvent, vous avez l'intervention des associations de patients qui font du plaidoyer en faveur de ces actions. Ensuite, il y a un rôle extrêmement important des employeurs. Et là aussi, il est extrêmement important que les employeurs soient mieux informés et préparés à prendre des mesures d'adaptation pour les maladies chroniques et pour les maladies rares. Et le rôle des médecins du travail, des médecins généralistes est également essentiel parce qu'ils jouent un rôle central dans la coordination de l'accompagnement et de l'orientation des patients. Donc, en conclusion et message clé, je vous dirais que vivre avec l'amylose implique non seulement des défis médicaux, j'ai pu le constater tout au long de la journée, mais aussi une grande vulnérabilité financière et professionnelle qu'il faut arriver à compenser par des décisions, par des décisions qui permettent d'avoir des financements de substitution. Une action précoce, des informations précises et l'accès aux droits juridiques et sociaux sont donc pour moi absolument essentiels. Les associations de patients qui proposent un accompagnement social et juridique sont des alliés clés pour aider les individus à maintenir leur autonomie et à naviguer dans les systèmes qui sont parfois extrêmement complexes. Et donc vous avez vraiment des associations qui... maintenant des associations de patients qui intègrent cette dimension et parfois, même s'ils ne peuvent pas répondre eux-mêmes, eh bien, ils vont orienter vers l'association spécialiste qui pourra aider le patient. Et puis, au-delà des efforts individuels, nous devons collectivement bâtir une société plus inclusive, une société qui anticipe la vulnérabilité, mais aussi une société qui s'appuie sur les nouvelles compétences acquises par les malades et leurs aidants plutôt que les pénaliser. Et là, en France, vous avez actuellement une structure qui véritablement met en avant les compétences qu'acquièrent les malades, mais aussi leurs aidants, et qui font un travail remarquable auprès des pouvoirs publics pour faire évoluer les lois, mais pour faire aussi évoluer les pratiques. Je vous remercie de m'avoir écouté et si vous avez des questions, j'y répondrai avec plaisir.
Thank you very much. It was really, really great. Really what we wanted to listen to. I'm wondering whether there are questions, comments from the audience. Otherwise, I know in the previous discussion it was raised a similar problem from the caregivers' perspective. So I was just wondering if you could briefly comment also on the support to caregivers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was a lot of information and precious, especially the last law from 2022. Thank you very much. I wanted to comment regarding the information you need to share with your company if you're working with a company. My own experience, I got the diagnosis in 2000, 25 years ago, and at this time the treatment was liver transplantation. So I did all the exam and I decided to inform my boss. So because I had to be in sick leave for several months, I explained in the situation. He was very friendly. He told me, "Oh, I know the CEO of the company. We will try to lobby, so maybe you can have the transplantation sooner." Very positive. But in parallel, he told me, "You're a manager. You have a big team. So we will split this team in two, and we will give half of this team to another manager." So the message I got, you're not a full man anymore. You don't have the ability. So very, very negative. So you need to follow the process Dominique described, discuss with the doctor specialized on the for work, share all the information, maybe when talking to your colleague, to your boss about the disease, you need to think and maybe don't go too fast to avoid having a negative message which can bring you anxiety and fear.
En France, il n'y a aucune obligation à révéler sa pathologie à l'employeur. Au contraire, l'employeur a l'interdiction de vous poser des questions sur votre état de santé.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions, comments for Dominique, for the other speakers? So thank you again, Dominique, for your fantastic talk. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So,
yeah, and I'd like to thank all the speakers this afternoon for great presentations, and I think we'd like to, if there's no other questions, I think we're all very relevant to go and enjoy the evening.
yeah, if I may add, we have the social dinner tonight, so you're all welcome. And I would like to thank the translators. I think it was a big day also for them. So thank you very much indeed. You did a great work, and everyone is happy with that. And we are very happy you will be with us tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Good evening.